The Last Hour, a chronicle of the prophetic convergence. Prologue, The Shadow of the Eagle. The year was moving sluggishly, heavy with the weight of impending history, in the heart of Washington, D.C. The air was thick not just with humidity, but with the invisible static of global power. Elias Thorne walked past the monuments of white marble that glowed under the moonlight, looking like the ruins of Rome before the fall. He was a man of two worlds, a seasoned historian of geopolitics and a quiet scholar of the apocalyptic texts. For years, Elias had tracked the pulse of the nations, but lately, the pulse had become an arrhythmia. He stopped by the Potomac River, looking at the reflection of the city lights on the dark water. To the world, this was the capital of the free world, the defender of democracy. But as Elias opened his worn leather notebook, his mind drifted to the ancient Greek text of Revelation 17:5. Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and abominations of the earth. The question had plagued theologians for centuries: who is Babylon? Is it a resurrected city in Iraq? Is it Rome? Or is it something else entirely? Elias looked back at the skyline. The United States of America, young empire, barely 250 years old, sat at the center of the world like a colossus. It was the hub of global finance, the forge of military might, and the fountainhead of a culture that had seduced the planet. Elias wrote in his journal, "She sits on many waters." The American influence reached every shore. Its blue jeans, its movies, its technology, and its currency were the language of the modern world. But with that influence came a spiritual export, a celebration of materialism, a redefining of morality, a promiscuity of the soul that invited all nations to drink from the cup of her excess. The merchants of the earth grew rich through the abundance of her luxury. Elias whispered, quoting the scripture, "If the U.S. collapsed, the world economy would stop." It was the perfect candidate for the end times Babylon, a nation that would not fade away slowly, but would be destroyed in 1 hour, leaving the world's kings and merchants weeping offshore. But Babylon was just the setting. The play required actors, and the lead actors had already taken the stage. Chapter 1, The Cyrus Anomaly. Elias turned the pages of his journal back to 2016 and 2017. He remembered the collective gasp of the global elite when Donald Trump ascended to the presidency. To the secular world, it was a political anomaly, a glitch in the matrix of establishment politics. To the prophetic eye, however, it was a divine disruption. Trump was brash, controversial, and defied every norm of presidential behavior. Yet, Elias saw a pattern reminiscent of King Cyrus of Persia, a pagan king used by God to restore Jerusalem. The world had held its breath when Trump made the announcement that no other president dared to make. The United States would recognize Jerusalem as the eternal, undivided capital of Israel. Elias remembered the day clearly. The diplomatic world screamed catastrophe. The United Nations issued condemnations. The Arab street threatened fire and blood. But Trump moved the embassy anyway. It was a move that transcended politics. By physically moving the seat of American diplomatic power from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, the United States had aligned itself with the prophetic clock. Jerusalem was the cup of trembling described in Zechariah, and the superpower of the West had just firmly placed its hand upon it. This decision was the first domino. It signaled to the spiritual realm that the time of the Gentiles was drawing to a close. But Trump was not working alone. In the shadows of the Oval Office, a quieter, more enigmatic figure was drafting the blueprint for the end. Chapter 2, The Architect of the Covenant. Elias's research file on Jared Kushner was thick. The president's son-in-law was an anomaly himself, young, Orthodox Jewish, soft-spoken, yet wielding influence that rivaled secretaries of state. While the world focused on Trump's tweets, Kushner was flying to Riyadh, Abu Dhabi, and Rabat. He was building a bridge over a chasm that had existed for thousands of years. Elias studied the text of the Abraham Accords. Signed in 2020 on the White House lawn, it was hailed as the greatest breakthrough in peace in a generation. Israel, the United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain stood together. Later, Sudan and Morocco joined. Peace and safety, Elias muttered. The secular world celebrated, but the student of Daniel 9:27 felt a chill. Then he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week. Was this the covenant? Elias analyzed the wording. It wasn't the final treaty. The Antichrist had not yet revealed himself to sign it. But it was the precursor. It was the proof of concept. Kushner had proven that the Arab world was tired of the Palestinian cause. They wanted technology, economy, and protection from Iran. They wanted what Israel had. This normalization was creating a new Middle East. It was creating a framework where a future leader, the man of sin, could step in and expand this treaty to include the entire world, guaranteeing Israel 7 years of security. The Abraham Accords were the scaffolding for the temple. Chapter 3: The Silence of the Temple Mount. To understand the next phase, Elias had traveled to Jerusalem 3 months prior. He stood now in his memory on the Western Wall Plaza, looking up at the golden dome of the rock that dominated the skyline. For nearly 2 millennia, since the Roman legions of Titus burned the Second Temple in 70 AD, the Jewish people had been without their house of sacrifice. The Mount was under Islamic control, a geopolitical powder keg where a single Jewish prayer could spark a riot. But Elias had gone underground metaphorically and literally. He had met with members of the Temple Institute in the Jewish quarter. What he saw there convinced him that the clock was seconds away from midnight. The Third Temple was no longer a theoretical concept recited in prayers. It was a construction project waiting for a permit. He had seen the blueprints, digitized and ready for execution. He had seen the golden vessels, recreated according to strict biblical measurements. The menorah, the table of showbread, the silver trumpets all sat in glass cases, waiting for the dust of the dome to clear. But the most chilling detail was the biology. Elias had visited a secure farm in the West Bank where he saw them, the red heifers. According to the Book of Numbers, the ashes of a flawless red heifer were required to purify the priesthood. Without this purification, no service could be performed in a new temple. For centuries, no such cow existed. Now, through genetic screening and careful breeding, they were here. They were of age, they were ready, the priests were trained. The altar was prefabricated. The only thing missing was the building itself. Elias knew the scripture in 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or that is worshipped, so that he sits as God in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. For the Antichrist to sit in the temple must stand. The geopolitical hurdle was impossible. The Muslim world would never allow it, unless a leader emerged who was so powerful, so charismatic, and so deceptive that he could broker a deal involving the holy sites. A deal that perhaps internationalized the Temple Mount, allowing all faiths to worship. The Abraham Accords had opened the door to interfaith dialogue. The next step was the Interfaith Temple. Chapter 4: The Anatomy of the Deception. Back in his apartment, surrounded by monitors, Elias watched the flow of global data. The preparation for the end times was not just taking place in the sands of the Middle East. It was taking place in the servers of Silicon Valley. The beast described in Revelation 13 causes all, both small and great, rich and poor, to receive a mark on their right hand or forehead. Without it, no one can buy or sell. 20 years ago, this sounded like science fiction. Today, it was infrastructure. Elias watched the news on the rise of central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. Cash was dying. Governments were moving toward programmable money currency that could be tracked, traced, and turned off if a citizen disobeyed. He looked at the rise of artificial intelligence. Deepfakes could now mimic reality so perfectly that truth was becoming a matter of opinion. The false prophet, who would perform lying signs and wonders, now had a digital arsenal at his disposal. The world was being conditioned. A global crisis, a pandemic, a cyber collapse, a nuclear threat would create the vacuum. Humanity, terrified and leaderless, would scream for order. They would trade freedom for security. They would trade privacy for bread. This was the spirit of the Antichrist, the solution to all human problems. Without God, a humanitarian genius, a peacemaker. The stage was set for a figure who would leverage the American military might, Babylon, the Israeli religious desire, the temple, and the global technological grid, the mark, to forge a brief, terrifying golden age. Chapter 5, The Fire in the North. But before the man of peace could arise, there had to be war. Chaos precedes control. Elias shifted his focus to the live tactical maps of 2025. The Middle East was not just tense, it was burning. The prophecy of Ezekiel 38 and 39, the war of Gog and Magog, loomed over the region like a dark storm cloud. Son of man, set your face against Gog, of the land of Magog. Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya are with them. Elias traced the lines of alliance. Magog, Russia. Once a superpower, now a wounded bear, aggressive and hungry. Consolidating power in Syria, Persia, Iran. The theological engine of hatred against Israel, Gomer, Togarmah, Turkey. Once a bridge to the west, now turning its back on NATO and looking east with Islamic fervor. The alignment was perfect. For the first time in history, Russia, Iran, and Turkey were operating as a military triumvirate in the Middle East. The spark had already been struck. In April, following the doctrine of maximum pressure inherited from the Trump era, Israel and the US had launched strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. Tehran's response was furious. Elias watched the footage of the Iron Dome intercepting missiles over Tel Aviv. The sky was a canvas of explosions. But this was just the jab. The haymaker was coming. Iran was activating its ring of fire. Hezbollah in the north, with 150,000 rockets pointed at Haifa, Hamas in the south. The Houthis in Yemen. Israel was being squeezed. The Bible predicted a specific moment. I will turn you around, put hooks into your jaws, and lead you out. Ezekiel 38:4. Russia and Iran were not just attacking for ideology, they were attacking for spoil. Israel, once a land of sand, had discovered massive natural gas reserves. It had become an energy powerhouse, competing with Russian dominance. The hooks in the jaws were economic. Elias visualized the coming invasion. It would not be a skirmish. It would be a descending avalanche from the north. The mountains of Israel would tremble. The world would watch in horror as the armies of God covered the land like a cloud. And where were Israel's allies? The prophecy of Zechariah 12 was brutal in its clarity. All the nations of the earth will be gathered against it. Even the United States, the Babylon of the West, would eventually falter. Whether through economic collapse, internal civil strife, or the rapture of the church, the American umbrella over Israel would retract. Israel would stand alone, and in that solitude, they would finally look up. Chapter 6, The Great Setup. Elias walked to his bookshelf and pulled down a volume on history. He thought about how blind the world was. People went to work, paid bills, watched sports, and scrolled through social media, oblivious that the ground beneath them was shifting. They saw the news as disconnected events, a treaty here, a war there, a new digital coin, a political scandal. Elias saw a mosaic. The Abraham Accords were not just a treaty. They were the diplomatic lubricant for the Antichrist's entry. The embassy move was not just politics, it was the centering of Jerusalem as the stumbling block of the world. The rise of AI was not just tech, It was the omnipresent eye of the beast system. The Russian-Iranian alliance was not just strategy. It was the fulfillment of a 2,600-year-old vision by Ezekiel. The world was pregnant with the apocalypse. The labor pains wars, rumors of wars, pestilences, earthquakes were increasing in frequency and intensity. Elias sat at his desk and began to write his final analysis. The man of sin was likely alive today. He was watching the same news. He was waiting for his moment. He would probably emerge from the chaos of the coming Middle East war. When Russia and the Islamic nations break themselves against the mountains of Israel, defeated not by the IDF, but by divine intervention, as Ezekiel predicts, the world will be in shock. The power vacuum will be immense. Into that silence, the Antichrist will step forward. He will offer a treaty to stabilize the region. He will allow the Jews to build their temple as a sign of universal tolerance. He will fix the broken global economy with his new digital system. The world will worship him. Chapter 7, The Midnight Cry. The night was deep now. The city of New York had quieted, though it never truly slept. Elias felt a heaviness in his spirit, a burden known only to the watchmen on the wall. He thought of the church. In America, it was largely asleep, drunk on the wine of Babylon's prosperity. It preached prosperity while the sky turned red. It sought political power while the spiritual foundations rotted. Yet, there was a remnant. There were those who saw the signs. Elias stood up and walked to the window one last time. He looked at the skyline, glowing with arrogance and electricity. He knew that one day, perhaps soon, the stock markets would freeze, the grid would fail, and the illusion of security would shatter. Babylon the Great is fallen, he whispered. But his heart was not filled with fear. It was filled with a strange, vibrating hope. Because the darker the night, the brighter the morning star, the script was written. The stage was set, the actors knew their lines. Trump and Kushner had played their parts, perhaps unwittingly moving the pieces exactly where the prophet said they would be. The Ayatollahs were playing their parts, the globalists in Davos were playing their parts. Elias realized that the most important thing wasn't the timeline, but the readiness. He remembered the words of Jesus, "Now when these things begin to happen, look up and lift up your heads, because your redemption draws near." The sound of a siren wailed in the distance, echoing through the canyons of steel and glass. It sounded like a shofar. The time of the Gentiles was ending, the time of Jacob's trouble was beginning. The king was at the door. Elias closed his notebook. There was nothing more to write. There was only the waiting. And the watching. Epilogue, the invitation. The story you have just read is not merely a work of fiction. It is a narrative woven from the headlines of today and the scriptures of yesterday. We live in a time where the impossible has become the inevitable. Who would have thought Israel would be reborn in a day? It happened in 1948. Who would have thought Jerusalem would be reclaimed? It happened in 1967. Who would have thought the Arab world would make peace with Zion? It happened in 2020. Who would have thought technology could control every transaction on Earth? It is happening now. The convergence of these signs is a statistical impossibility, unless there is a sovereign author guiding history to its conclusion. If you find yourself watching the news with a sense of unease, if you feel that the world is spinning faster, heading toward a cliff, you are not wrong. The birth pains are real. But the purpose of prophecy is not to scare you, it is to prepare you. It is to show you that God is in control of the chaos. The rise of the Antichrist, the fall of Babylon, the wars in the Middle East, these are not signs that God has lost control. They are proofs that His word is true. The prophetic clock is ticking, the seconds are counting down. The peace and safety is a mirage. The storm is coming, but for those who are in the ark, for those who know the King, the storm is not the end. It is the herald of the kingdom. Are you watching? Are you ready? The curtain is rising. Don't be found sleeping in the last hour.